We're on Daf Daled Amud Beis, and we're up to Rav Ashi. Elam Rav Ashi, you'll count down about 7 lines from the top. And we're talking about deriving the conclusion that Shinui Bailim, if the Kohen has in mind the wrong Bailim, is a posel in Kabbalah Saddam. Says Rav Ashi, Asya Me'el Nazir. Right, El Nazir is one of 3 karbonos. The ayil is the single unique carbon of the 3 karbonos of a nazir when he's mitayr himself, when he's mafkia and mesayim his nazirus tichsiv. And with regard to the ayil in Parshas Baloscha, it says, no, this is earlier than Parshas Baloscha. It says v'es ha'ayil yaseh zevach shlomim. So it says zevach shlomim, which means for the sake of shlomim, shetei asiyos l'shem shlomim, and that again is going to teach us the psul of shinui kodesh. But we have the eno inyan principle we've already established that in all 4 avodos there's a psul of shinui kodesh. Eno inyan l'shinui kodesh the nafkele mehosam is therefore tnei l'inyan shinui bailam. Okay, now Rav Acha is going to object to the drasha of Rav Ashi. Amalei Rav Acha bar Abo l'Rava, Ema Yaseh, right? It says V'sayil Yaseh, and the word Yaseh is what's called a klal. It's general and not specific, and therefore Yaseh would include all the asiyos, meaning all the avodos. And then it says in the pasuk Zevach, Yaseh Zevach. Zevach is shchita, and that's a prat. Now we have a principle, a klalu prat, ein beklal elamashe beprat, which would mean that the pasuk Zevach, referring to the shchita, would limit the psul of shinui kodesh to shchita. Svicha in midiachrini lo. And again, with the Ameno Inyan, we're deriving from that Shinui Bailim, but that's only in the case of Shchita. We don't know the other Avodos. And the Gemara, in the name of Rava, responds, Iksiv, you're right. If it would have said, Yaseh Shlomim Zevach, so then we would say that the word Yaseh is a klal, and it includes all the avodos, all the asiyos of shlomim. And then immediately afterwards, after yaseh shlomim, it says zevach, referring to shchita, and that's a prat. And then we would apply the principle of ein b'chlal al mashe b'prat. But hashta, now, what does it say in the pasuk iksiv? Yaseh zevach shlomim. So the word zevach appears in the pasuk before the word shlomim. So that means that the Zevach was coming, the Zevach is now wedged between Yaseh and Shlomim, meaning the Zevach is coming now as a prat, as we said before. But the klal here is Yaseh Shlomim, right? Yaseh referring to all the avodos. And then at the end of the pasuk, it should have said Zevach, but it doesn't. The Torah injected Zevach in the middle. And that's a psul, so to speak. I'm using that word loosely. That's a disqualification of the principle of klal prat. Dahavile klal she'eno mole, right? It's a klal that wasn't completed, and before you completed the klal by adding the word shlomim, and it would have said yaseh shlomim in the middle, the pasuk wedges the word zevach, and klal she'eno mole and done also b'klal prat. So your kasha is maybe we should limit the psul of shinui bailim only to shchita. And you're basing your kasha on the klal uprat. There is no klal uprat. So the Gemara now offers an answer in the name of Ravina on the kasha of Rav Acha, and I'm going to say, Ravina Maliolam, I'll even grant you that donim, even if you have a klal she'eno mole, which means the Torah wedged and cut off the klal before it completed, I cannot use and apply the principle of klal uprat. But nevertheless, here I'm going to include all the asiyos, that they all have to be l'shem bailim, because at the end of the pasuk, if we read the whole pasuk, here I have the Torah or, he says, "Ves ha'ayil yaseh zevach shlomim lashem." So the word lashem is going to be a klal, and therefore chazar v'kolal. So again, after it says zevach shlomim, where we had the problem that the zevach wedges between the yasa and the shlomim, and therefore interferes with the klal, but nevertheless we have a klal at the end of the pasuk that says la Hashem, everything that's done la Hashem, and all the avodos are done la Hashem, so that's a klal. Now, at this point, Rav Acha is going to raise an objection to Ravina on his response, his answer. Amalei Rav Acha midifti Ravina v'lodami klal kama leklal basra. There's another limitation or rule that governs klal uprat, and that is that the klal basra has to be similar to the klal kama. And you don't have that here when you start with yas as a klal and end with lashem as a klal. Why? Because klal kama marbe asios. Now, the word asios here refers to those avodos, those performances that bring about the kapara, the korban, and those are arba avodos. Now, you have to understand that in kodshim, in avodos hakarbonos, there are 4 avodos, but in addition, there are, I don't know, for lack of a better word, I'll call them auxiliary avodos. And the difference being is that the 4 avodos are critical to generate the kapara, and the other 2 are just lemitzvah. They enhance the korban, but they're not in the capacity to generate the kapara. And what are those? Those are afilu shvichas shiraim and aktoras murim. So this is very fascinating because there are certain parts of the animal that after the zrikas adam have to be burnt on the mizbeach. Those are called imurim. But aktoras imurim is not critical for the kaparas hakorban. Then there's something called shvichas hashirayim, meaning that there's dam that's left in the mizrak after you did all your matanos, all your zrikos, and that leftover dam has to be poured on the mizbeach hanachoshes, on the outer mizbeach. And as we get into Zevachim, we're going to have more and more dealings with shvichas shirayim. But be that as it may, the word Lashem at the end of the pasuk is kolel, everything that you do for Hashem, including those avodas that are not critical to generate the kapara. For example, shvichas shirayim al yisod and haktar saimur. So that's another foul, a technical foul, so to speak, in the laws and application of klal uprat. So the Gemara answers to Ravina, Ha Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel Beklolu Prati Darshki Hai Gavna Klal Prat. So Rabbi Shmuel is the one who is now involved in setting the rules for Klal Prat, and he's of the opinion that even if the Klal Rishon is not similar to Klal Achron, nevertheless we still apply that midah, that hermeneutic principle of Klal Prat u'Klal. Iatadon elikena prat. Ma prat meforish ba'avoda ube'ina lishmon. So just like the prat here in this case is zevach, which is shchita, and that is an avoda that requires lishma because it says in the pasuk yaseh shlomim, it means l'shem shlomim afkol avoda. So too we can expand that rule to apply and encompass even Kabbalah and Halacha. Ube'ina lishma, they also have to be done. The Kabbalah Saddam and the Halacha Saddam Lemizbeach have to be done lishma, for the sake of that korban. However, those asiyos that are not critical to the avodas hakorban, like shvichas shirayim or haktar seimurim, they're not kein prat, and therefore they're not included in the klal uprat. Now the Gemara asks another kasha: Ima prat mafurish ba'avoda. If the prat itself is referring to avoda, well, there's something very important and unique about the avodah of shchita, which in this pasuk says zevach, shechayaven aleh b'chutz, that if you shech the korban outside of the azara, then you chayiv kares. Av kol avoda shechayaven aleh b'chutz is we should include any avoda that you're chayiv kares for if you do it b'chutz. Now, there's only one other avoda besides shchita where you're chayiv for b'chutz, and that is shchita uzrika. So if he's zorik the dam and he's standing chutz la'azara, then he's chayiv kares. So now I would say that if we want klal pratu klal, and the klal should be similar to the prat, and the prat is shchita, so I can grant you that zrika is similar to shchita because both shchita and zrika, in event that you do it b'chutz, you chayiv kares. But if that be the case, then kabbalah v'locha lo. You're not chayiv kares if a kohen's standing outside the azor and he's makabel adam, nor if he's standing outside the azor and he's molech the dam and he brings it all the way over to the mizbeach. There's no chiyuv kares, and therefore in those two avodos of kabbalah and halacha, I should not be able to derive the conclusion that shinui bailim is a posel. Inami, I could ask you the opposite question. Ma prat mufurash. Take a look at how unique shchita is, because it says zevach in the pasuk. It's a davar haton tzafon, right? The shchita has to be done in the tzafon part of the azara, and this is derived in Kodesh Kodshim from Mishnayos in the parak that we read every morning in davening Ezem HaKolman. And the Yeshna B'chatos Pnimios, and the shchita on a chatos whose dam is brought inside into the Mizbeach Hazov, and that's where the Zrika is done. Zaf Kol Ton Tzofun the Yeshna B'chatos Pnimios. So now, if Zevach is going to be the Prat and Ein B'klal L'mashe B'Prat, then the klal that's being compared to the Prat would have to have these two unique elements and similarities to the prat, which is shchita, namely, it's going to have to be something where it applies in the tzafon and dafka in the tzafon, and also it's included in the chatas pnimis. And what would be similar to zvicha in that sense? Davaton tzafon yeshna b'chatas hapnimis is dafka shchita v'kabbalah. So the shchita has to be done in the azora, in the tzafon of the azora. Nowhere else in the Azor. So too, the Kabbalah has to be done in the Tzafon. And in the case of Chatas Pnimius, the Shchita is the prerequisite for the Avoda of the Chatas Pnimius, and you need Kabbalah, but then Zrika Lo. So now we're in a bind. We really don't know how to apply this principle of Klal Uprat. What unique elements of the prat, meaning shchita, should serve as the klal, to expand the klal to be equated with the prat? Should we go in one direction, and then in that direction we're going to include Kabbalah, but we're going to exclude Zrika, or should we go in the other direction and we'll include Zrika and exclude Kabbalah? So the Gemara has a new principle here. We have a rule that if you have a prat uklal and you could take that in two different directions, and the Torah doesn't explicate which direction you should go, then we go in both directions. Now, to take a stab at this, again, it's, limited liability. If I remember correctly from Bava Kama, there's such a thing as l'chumra, that if you don't know whether the limit should go l'chumra or l'kuli, you always go l'chumra. That's why the Torah made it ambiguous, because the Torah assumes that we're going to go l'chumra. So therefore, the psul of shini bailam is going to apply to all the avodos, whether it's Kabbalah, whether it's Rika. Lishnachrin, another possibility is chada v'chada teku b'milsa. That Zrika and Kabbalah are equal, because we don't know which one of the two to be marba and to make it similar to shchita. Each one has a chumrah that the other one doesn't have. As we said before, that the Kabbalah could apply to tzafon and to chatas pnimius, Zrika does not, whereas Zrika is more chamur because of the avodas chutz, is therefore teku b'milsei. Each one, so to speak, has a right to demand that it be included in the klal uprat. And the klal here that's derived from Yaseh, Zevach Shalom Lashem, is going to include all of them. He adds a comment here that he doesn't see the difference exactly between this answer and the previous answer. It's just written in two different formulations, but it's really the same. So he quotes here the Brisker Rav, who says that Miachar says Zrika v'Kabbalah shkulos, right? Because there's a chumrah in Zrika, there's a chumrah in Kabbalah. Ein biyodenu lachriya mi behemu ke'ein aprat. We don't know which one is the proper candidate for me'ein aprat and is similar to shchita. Nimtza she'efshal lidrosh mikosib zeh ke'ein aprat. Harei zeh ke'ilo nichtav aprat klal. Wow. It's a whole new concept here that sometimes you can be oblivious to the prat. You could, so to speak, disqualify the prat. So the Gemara now asks the following question: Ashkechan El Nazir. Fine. So in the parasha of El Nazir, we had the pasuk of Yaseh Shlomim Zeva of Yaseh Zevach Shlomim. Okay, so from that pasuk, you know that El Nazir requires l'shem bailim for that particular nazir. But how do we know other shlomim? There are many other karbonos shlomim. And you want to say that we're going to derive that chumrah from El Nazir to all shlomim. Mal El Nazir sheken yeshim odam acher. As we said at the outset, the carbon shlayel of the nazir is one of three karbonos. He has to bring a whole set that includes not only the ayal, but also the chatos and also the ola. So that's puts the carbon ayal in a very special category. It has to be accompanied by two other carbonos, and therefore that's a chumrah in ayal. I have no right, therefore, to expand the psul of shalol shem bailim to include all other shlomim. And the Gemara says in Cain, if you're going to argue that there's no din that requires l'shem bailim in other Shlomim, Nichtov, the Torah should have said, the es hayal yaseh zvevach lishlomav in the possessive. It should have added the yud mem at the end, the yud vav at the end instead of the yud mem, because the yud vav would indicate that only for this particular carbon shlomim, namely the ayal. But my shlomim, why did the Torah, instead of saying for this particular ayal, it says shlomim in general, the rabbis call shlomim. Okay, ashkan shlomim. But b'shar kol kodshim inom v'chiteimen nolif mishlomim mal shlomim. We have a chumrah in shlomim, a whole bunch of chumras in shlomim. We consider shlomim as kodshim kalim, and if it's low on the totem pole, but yet it does have certain unique aspects. So, by the way, you see from this Gemara that even kodshim kalim could be more significant and more lechumra than kodshim, because what's unique about shlomim? It's te'unim smicha. It requires nisachim. That means niskei hayayin utnufas chazav v'shok. There's no tnufas chazav v'shok in any other carbon other than shlomim. Although the ayal of the nazir requires a tnufas chazav v'shok, but that's a unique halacha in ayal. It's not the general halacha of shlomim. It requires that the kohen puts his hands underneath the hands of the bailam. It does tnufa, but anyway, other zvachim, other than shlamim, for example, chatas, oshem, and ola, they don't require tnufa chazav shok. They don't have Nesachim. I always thought to myself, this is true, that Nesachim is Yayin. Yayin is a sense of Shira. Here he's bringing a Karmel Chatos or an Osha for his sin. This is not the right time to start singing. But we do sing Hashamnu. Anyway, Ella Amakra, the pasuk says, Zos. Oh, this is very, very famous. Okay, now we're getting to a very famous drasha, and this is a pasuk that was included in the seder of the piyutim that we sing on Sukkot. Zos haTorah la'olala mincha lechatos Hashem la'miluim leZevach Hashlam. So we have here a list of all types of karbonos in a pasuk in Vayikra Zion. And it opens with the words Zos HaTorah. And he kishan akos, the Torah has now equated all the different kinds of karbonos l'shlom, right? Because this pasuk is referring to carbon shlom. Ma shlomim bein shini kodesh bein shini bailam be'inon. You have to make sure that you don't violate shini kodesh and have in mind a different kind of zevach, or shini bailam have in mind a different owner of the carbon. And it requires lishma, both for kodesh, the type of carbon, and for bailim, for whom it's being brought. And if he does a shinui, then it's not ola l'shem chova, although the carbon is kosher, is af kol, meaning all karbonos, bein shini kodesh, bein shini bailim, bein lishma, because of the hekesh of all karbonos l'shlamim. So now the Gemara says, well, if the source for all Zevachim that are brought shalol lishma is that you need lishma, is ema heich the shachil shalol lishma lifsul. Why do you tell me that the carbon is still kosher? Just it's not ol l'bayim l'shem chova. What gives you the right to say such a thing? Maybe the Torah is saying that if you had in mind the wrong carbon or the wrong person, which is called shini kodesh or shini bailav, then the carbon is possible, which we're going to say by Pesach and Chatas, but now we're talking about other karbonos. And the Gemara says, Amakra, we're going to see soon on Amid Bey, on Daf Hey, that Reish Lakish, at least initially, didn't know about the following drasha, Amakra, Motzi v'sechet tishma sisa kasher nedarta, and it says at the end of the pasuk, Hashem elokecha nedav. So the pasuk opens with a neder, and a neder means that I obligated myself that I will bring a carbon, and it ends with a nedav where I said, this is the carbon that I want to bring. Hi nedava neder. Who you opened up the pasuk with a neder. Now you're concluding it with nedava. How can it be both a neder and a nedava? They're two mutually exclusive concepts. Ella im kamashan adarta sisa. If the carbon was done with the proper kavanah lishma, yeh neder. Then it fulfills your obligation, and you don't have to replace it if it gets lost or stolen. But v'im lav, if it wasn't brought lishma, is yehei nedava. The Torah is saying it automatically becomes a dava, which means it's a carbon and it's kosher. It's like olas nedava, and it's just not all l'bayil m'shem chova. Could you have such a thing as a carbon that's kosher that's not all l'bayil m'shem chova, and it's not there's no ritzui carbon? Yeah, that's called the carbon nedava. When I voluntarily bring a carbon, that's what it is. Now the Gemara wants to know, why do we need two parts of this pasuk? On the one hand, it says Motzav V'Sechet Tishmar, and on the other hand, it says at the beginning of the pasuk Zos HaTorah. No, I'm sorry, my mistake. They're in two different books of the Pentateuch. The Gemara wants to know, if we have Zos HaTorah as a hekesh of all the different karbonos, equating them all together, so why do I need Motzes Vasecha? The Gemara answers, if we only had the pasuk Motzes Vasecha, that would not be enough. I still need the pasuk Zos HaTorah.